So I'm here to talk to you about SLOs and building a culture of SLOs within your organization. So what do? I'm an SRE, engineering manager. And what that means is that I'm the guy who is kind of going ahead of the team, building some of those relationships and paved roads before the team actually get into the integration of the end-to-end side of things. So the way that I really work is that I think communication and collaboration is key and essential for this. So just a quick question before we start. Who knows what an SLO is? So you've got a few people in a DevOps crowd, and I can see my team as well. I'd like to think that they should know, so that's a very good thing. But yeah, so it's on here, you probably read it, service level objectives. So what do these do? That's what I'm going to cover. It's going to be a lot about the who, the why, the what, and the how. But what I want to really kind of entrain in this talk is what to avoid as well. And I've put a disclaimer on here, and that is there is no one size fits all set of procedures to bring SLOs online in any organization. It can't be done by rote because SLOs are not a light switch. They don't occur in a vacuum. They require a lot of teamwork and a lot of collaboration. So this is going to be the body of the talk. It's going to be the what, dive into the SLOs. I'm going to show you some interesting figures about SLOs themselves and SLIs. We're going to talk about adopting the culture within the organization, some links and questions. Okay, but before we start, who's familiar with SRE? As a discipline? Cool. Okay. What I'll do is, just for the benefit of those who haven't heard of it before, is just give a little bit of an overview. And yeah, so back in 2003 is when it all kind of kicked off. And Ben Trainer-Sloss, the person who kind of coined it when he was hiring for this type of new role that sat somewhere between engineering and the monitoring of applications when you're trying to build something at incredible scale. We're not talking here about, SMEs, small mom and pop shop operations, but Google scale. So massive levels of complexity, all the way through to now 2022, 2023. So it's 20 years going strong. Clearly, there's a lot of appetite and value for it, and now it's really permeated so that people are actually hiring for jobs that are SRE related now. Before, if you would try and hire somebody for an SRE role, they'll probably look at you and walk away, or they just kind of say, "What is this mystification thing?" But now I'm glad to see there's a lot of people who know what it is. Okay, right, so entering into SLOs. Right, okay, so is anybody brave enough to call out? Anyone brave enough to call out what they think an SLO is in, let's say, 3 words? No?
From service level objectives.
Yeah? Well, not quite the literal definition, but something to encapsulate it.
It's like an SLA, but internally.
Yeah, I think that's quite good. Like that. Any others?
Is the compromise between how fast you develop and how much downtime are you willing to assume?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's value to that as well. It definitely is a compromise, it's a trade-off, and it happens all the time. But going back to what this gentleman said here, they really are they can be like a canary for you in your organization. They can give you insights to what's happening as it's occurring before the user is affected or impacted. So that's one of the great benefits. And so here's a list that I've put together myself. And some of these are kind of tricks. They're not necessarily what an SLO is. One of them actually is a relatively good definition. But yeah, so what I'll do is I'll focus on just 2. So I think they're good as a set of objectives set collaboratively by teams to drive better decisions. I quite like that because without decisions off the back of your SLOs, really they're not doing anything. They're just numbers that are hanging around in a vacuum. And one thing that I really don't like are some of these ones on the right. So a representation of customer expectations, a new exciting methodology. a way to predict future software performance. Well, they're actually none of those things. But some of these are composite, because SLOs are very much a composite thing. So I actually asked an AI what it thought SLOs were. And it gave quite a good overview. Got to give credit to this artificial intelligence. It gives very much like a literalized machine response to what an SLO is. It's a bit tautological in places, a bit self-reflective, and I won't bore you through it. But basically, it's a bit of jargon, but does touch upon a few things. I like the fact that it points out the purpose of an SLO is to provide clear, measurable goals for the performance and service of a product. I mean, I think if it knows that, it's quite good. But let's get on to a real human. So this was actually taken as an excerpt from a blog from Ben Trainer SLOs. I'll just read it out. An SLO is a target value for a given metric used to communicate the desired level of performance for a service. When the target is achieved, that aspect of the service is considered to be performing adequately. In the context of SLOs, the metric being evaluated is called an SLI, or service level indicator. So in the next slides, you'll see I'll talk about the stack that is involved in setting SLOs and how they relate, because it's very much a stack. Okay. So here, right at the bottom of the stack, you've got the metrics, or what are the signals. These metrics are what you'll use to track your application. Then on top of that, the SLIs. The SLIs, if you like the unit of measure. So if you're traveling fast, you probably want to know what you're doing in, meters per second, miles per hour, etc. So your SLI can be something like requests per second, or it can be errors per day, or latency. So, and that response in milliseconds. And then that really feeds into the SLOs themselves. So really, SLIs are giving you an indication of what your SLO is doing, because your SLO is something that's happening continuously. Data is continuously being recorded about your software applications and your products. And the SLOs themselves are something that is reviewed periodically during what's called like an aggregation window, which is really up to the team and each individual. So it can happen quarterly, daily, monthly, etc. It really gives a good foundation to have this base level understanding that the metrics are at the base. The metrics form the SLIs, which are the indicators, and then the objectives. So that's really important. Okay. Now, something that's not often mentioned is error budgets and error budget itself. Error budget is the converse of your SLO. So let's say, you've got 99.9 that you've put in availability. That means you've got 0.1. And that 0.1 is how long you can be down for. And that's your error budget. It means that, let's say that's 45 minutes per month. Then that means you can be down within that time. But they've actually got states, and at each particular state there are things that you can do, sensible things to do. For example, if you're bust, does it really make most common sense to actually want to release new features, release a brand new product line that's going to require a lot of testing capability and possibly bust your error state even further? Probably not. When you're in surplus though, that's actually a really good idea, because that's when you've got a lot more flexibility and a degree to try out more things, to be more brave, to be more bold. So that's what I would focus on in the surplus arena. When you're bust, obviously, you don't want to be there, but being bust is actually, it's normal. It's not something that should be shied away from. Obviously, nobody wants to breach their SLOs, but it's actually natural to, at some points in your development life cycle, be down, because 100% availability, ladies and gentlemen, is a myth. We can't get that. We can strive for it, but it's something that, it's a myth, and I wouldn't aim for that.
Is it okay to ask questions on the fly at the relevant point?
I would say questions at the end. Yeah. So when your SLO is in deficit, at this point you're busting. What would you do at this point? I'd want to evaluate risk and the risk appetite for releasing new features. I want to pay down technical debts. I want to notify users maybe. And then when you're in recovering, because your SLO happens in a cycle, it will actually recover. So if you've got 45 minutes per month, then the next month it's going to recover. You're going to reclaim that back, and then you can do some more interesting things with that. So here, it's a simple application. And I'd like to talk about critical user journeys and metrics within your app, right? So what do you monitor? How do you know what to monitor? What is good to monitor? It's actually something that can be very complex and very simple. I would always say start simple and don't boil the ocean. Yeah, because during application lifecycle processes, there's a lot of features within your application. What's the most important? Let's say you're providing statements for somebody in a financial application, right? If you can see your statements on the screen, that's good. But if you can't download those statements, then, that's okay if you can see the statements on the screen. It's a bit of a trade-off. If you wanted to change, let's say, the theme of your application from, let's say, colors to dark mode, is that something that you should really focus on as having an SLO on? I would say probably not. Track critical user journeys only, and then that will give you a greater insight to what matters to the business. And then you can even go on to build SLAs on top of the SLOs. But I would always start lean, build small, and go fast. All right, so here's a little bit as to the why. All right, ignorance ain't bliss. If you've got, let's say, a dozen services or 100 services or 1,000 services, you're going to be encountering errors on a daily basis, right? Think of it as a ship. You're navigating the ship through terrain, through icebergs, and you've got a destination to get to. The more you know, the better. The less you know, the more you're in a reactive state. A reactive state is not good for engineers and engineering teams because it can lead to burnout, and that's not good at all. We want to have proactive, happy people where data is actually reflected accurately, and it's okay to be honest. You don't want to cover up your SLOs if they're bust. They should be part of a conversation within the organizations, right? So just to go into some more examples about the SLOs and the SLAs. Your SLIs are really used for measuring. SLOs are for tracking, and the SLAs are the real customer side of things. So if you look at measuring performance as a canonical use case of your SLI, tracking internal tracking and decision making, that's really important. You want to be able to make decisions. As I've mentioned before, without that ability to make decisions, then it's really just data on a page. Okay. So I hope everybody can at least, if you take away one thing from this event and this talk, is that SLIs feed into the SLOs, and the SLOs themselves can be used to define the SLAs. But they don't necessarily have to exist in parallel. SLAs are not necessarily a superset of SLIs and SLOs. Okay. Right. So this is just a quick play. We've got some numbers up on the board, and these are done in increments per annum over the course of the year. And I'll just show you what that means if you're aiming for some kind of availability. So let's say this is our booking system application. 99% is 3.65 days per annum, and so on. You can really see that the more you strive for more nines, 5 nines is the golden standard, that's literally 5.26 minutes per year, which, if you blink, that goes very quickly. And it's extremely hard to attain that level. So when you do start out, if you want to set availability standards, I would say don't immediately go for 5 nines. Start small, build out to a logical way. Yeah. Look at your existing data set when you come to set these within your organization. look at history, because history can tell you, can you even actually attain this? Is it attainable? If you say you want 5 9s and your past history is indicating that you're not getting 1, then you've got a ways to go. Yeah. So into the phases of SLO adoption, there's 4 areas. I mean, these are not blueprints, but they can inform how you go. So identify services. This is the who and the what. So the who, you've got to have the right people on board. If you haven't got the right people on board, the culture can't emerge in and of itself. You really need to have legal, senior executive stakeholders, product, engineering, and maybe risk as well. You need to have like a good cohort of people, because if one of them is lagging or one of them doesn't get it as a concept, what will happen is you'll end up keep repeating yourself or spinning the wheels and not making any progress. And one thing I'd just like to say is that at that level, you want to start breaking down your components into services that you can track. And then you can't ever be more reliable than your third-party vendors or dependencies. You can't, if you've got a front-end facing application, you can't necessarily be more reliable than DNS, right? That's just impossible. So if you've got something like the internet, which does break down, or browsers which have issues, you can't be more reliable than them. I'd just like to crystallize that. So step 2, defining the goals and the policies of each SLO. This is a little bit about the why. We want to decide what's meaningful to the organization. What is it that we really want to track? Because without that, you can't make progress. So if you've got an application that's a streaming application like Kafka versus a front-end application, what's more important? Is it the time series of events in that stream? Something for a front-end application is going to be availability. For Kafka, I would say something maybe like an error. So when you get errors, then that would be a good way to do it, because there's 2 ways of reporting. You've got like a time-based, and then you've got events, which can happen once or twice or however often they occur during the life cycle of the application. Then 3, reporting, which is very much the integration of how you do that. And that's where we're actually at in Funding Circle. So we're getting into the how we do it. We've gone ahead forward, and we've got a collection of services which are fundamental and critical that we need to support. And now we're actually building out on that, which I'm pleased to say. We're motivating that within the teams, and we have got buy-in within the necessary stakeholder groups within the organization. And then after that, you'd really want to iterate. I always say this, be smart. When it comes to these, you want to be incredibly specific, talking back to the other point of getting the right components. Definitely measurable. You want to have something that's really achievable. Don't make a rod for your own back. Just keep it simple, stupid, and iterate and build out from there. And I'd just like to leave you with a little video, which I'll show for a few seconds. Right. Who reckons they know why I may have showed them that video? Any takers?
small things going wrong can make big things go wrong if we don't watch all the steps in between and monitor them and design them correctly.
Exactly, yeah. Very, very well and eloquently put. So it really is about that and the whole journey end to end, getting from one place to another. You know, it's got a lot more complex, the applications that we develop. If you think about what we were doing 12 years ago versus 20 years ago, the sheer complexity of scale is incredible. And this video talks to that. So I thought I'd just leave you with that as some parting. Now, any questions at all, guys?
You mentioned error budget states, and you've also mentioned that you're partly putting the SLOs into progress. So you might not know the answer, but my question is whether a team going from, or whether an organisation going from not having these error budget states being visible to having them visible, whether that makes significant changes. For example, being able to measure and handle tech debt.
I mean, that's quite a long question, and it's a good one. Yeah, does having it allow us to make better decisions within the engineering team, basically? And I would say absolutely, yeah. Because what it can do is it can generate a sense of people knowing where they're going within the error budget. If you don't have it, you don't know. And if you know what you're approaching to, what your levels are, then you can make corrective decisions, preventive and corrective decisions. So when you have the SLO as part of the error budget policy, the policy document, you will define what you need to do at given states. And for engineering, that can differ and vary. People in engineering might need to do different things from people in products, but it's all about driving those decisions and demarcating them. So absolutely yes.
Does anyone have any more questions?
You can speak loud enough. Just the flip side of that. Do you run a risk of people being too afraid to make changes? Let's say if you were 99.9 and you're on the cusp of failing your SLI.
Yeah, I mean,
engineers not turn around and say, no, we're not touching this for a while, or at least a good couple of months.
that is not the spirit of what it's for. But if you took it to the letter, then maybe people would do that, but it's not the spirit of it, right? It's designed to allow people to make intelligent decisions. So at that point, rather than say no releases, maybe release more slowly, or pivot 60% of your time on paying down the tech debt, or something like that would be more of a strategic thing to do. But yeah, there's definitely that conflict of interest there that occurs, that you pointed out.